So there are two tools primarily that you're going to need to better understand this video. The first is spiral dynamics, very helpful tool. Very briefly, it's a system of kind of mapping interior development, particularly values, how you make value of the world, what you value. The second is the deep state or the shadow state. And very briefly, that is all that classified data within the government that the average personnel do not have access to. So there's layers of information that we don't get to see in government. That's the shadow state, that's the deep state. And we see little hints of it with things like WikiLeaks and NSA, dumps and so forth. So what I'm going to look at is a bit of a dark avenue of thought. Unfortunately, I don't mean to do this, but if this does go down, it would probably be better for you to know this than not. So we know a little bit about Clinton and Trump being somewhat friendly prior to election cycles. In fact, Trump donated some money to Clinton at one point. I think the 2008 run. It does not mean that he is indeed backing her, but it does raise some questions. So one of the questions that arises in my mind is there's been this talk about the left and the right not really being dichotomous. They're, this often in this world, this notion of the Hegelian dialectic that's brought up, and that's the left counters the right, that makes a new synthesis, and that synthesis is used as one of the next arms for the left or the right, and then that gives an antithesis which makes a new synthesis. Okay, but whether or not that's in fact the case, I'll go down this avenue of thought just in case it's the way it does in fact fold. And so it's a potential that could be helpful. So if Hillary gets in, probably fairly consistent policies, probably a further degradation of the middle class, in my opinion. We'll see more poor people, more very rich people, and fewer in the middle. If Trump gets in, I see a little bit more chaotic things happening, and I think a lot of people will. I think a lot of people do see that. In other words, if Trump gets in, they could use it as a tool to blame conservatives. They could blame you if you're conservative, or me. I'm not necessarily conservative, but roughly speaking, I'm in that world. Probably more conspiracy-minded people in general. So they blame us, and then they use that as a tool to, like Brexit to some extent, to implement new agendas, potentially. I don't know, hard to say, but I've heard talk about the idea that 2018 might be a new world currency. Hard to say. There was an Economic Weekly or Economic Times article, 1988, had a phoenix rising out of a fire with money underneath it, and it said new world currency. And on the phoenix there's a medallion that has 2018 on it. Hard to say. It could be predictive programming, could be nothing, absolutely nothing. Anyway, uprising potentially then 2017, given the climate, if in particular there's an economic collapse. So I say that because we see things like Deutsche Bank. We see some really ominous signs in the market, herky-jerky movements. Volatility's been really repressed, so it's been steady but repressed. Gold and silver markets, whatever you think of them, probably been repressed. And the American debt is soaring, of course. So is most world's debt. World's in $153 trillion of debt. To whom is the big question, right? Who do we owe that to? some kind of collapse, probably, whether or not it's full recession or depression or even worse, potentially, on the horizon. There's no real room for interest rates to go lower. Like, it's at 0.25% in the States. Most of the European states are very low, if not zero or negative. That's the tool they often use to help ease the markets in times of depressions or recessions. When they don't have it as a tool, or very little of it, it makes those times a lot more chaotic in many regards. We haven't seen it this low, especially going into a time that might be a recession. Anyway, sorry for that bad news, if it's bad news. Grab your tub of GMO popcorn and enjoy the show.